My friends, that was actually excellent Swedish, totally understandable. So, President Mrs. Rajavi, friends of a free, democratic and secular Iran, both here and, as I can see on the screen, in many places around the world, coming to a very, very important meeting. And I would like to start, like Guy did, to pay my thanks to the witnesses that we were listening to earlier on, because at the heart of what we are discussing, this is actually what happens with repression and dictatorship. It's the witnesses that tells us about the family members that we lost, about what happens when you see breakdown of rule of law. So we must remember, you must remember, and the world outside must learn about this. I think that the crackdown on freedom you have seen with the start on 1979 onwards, as in everywhere in the world where you crack down on freedom, you will see people leave, the ones that can, the ones that have the time, the resources to leave, and that happened also in Iran. They spread over the world. I saw the head count for the diaspora of Iranians in the world now up at 4 million people, and of course most of them, the biggest portion of this in the United States. But I'm very proud to tell you that number 8 on that list is my home country of Sweden. We have more than 120,000 Iranians that live and actually also make Sweden more prosperous. I'm very proud of them, and I want to tell you that they are gifted, they are well educated, they are well integrated. They have shown my home country and the world that Muslims and Christians can live side by side in respect and tolerance of each other. That's the example to follow. When you say you want a free, democratic and secular Iran, it's very important to remember those 3 words. And just by saying a few words about democratic, it's very popular nowadays for rulers to say that they were elected. But when we say democracy, we mean something more than just counting votes that you actually can fix on the side. With democracy, we mean exactly what John said, freedom of speech. We mean freedom of media that is freestanding from the rulers and that can also report on things that are not good. They can criticize the rulers. That's the role of free media, and they should give space to everyone. We mean the right to assemble and to campaign. We mean the right for anyone to stand as a candidate. If you don't follow all these rules, it's not a democracy. Then it's actually more of an appointment of a few rather than someone who has been elected by the people. So President Raisi is not in support of the Iranian people. He is chosen among a few men who thought that's the one we want to keep control. That's something completely different and should not be stated as an elected official that should be respected alongside with those who have won open, free elections around the world. I think that the situation in many countries, as has been mentioned, is worrying to the world, but it's especially worrying when it comes to Iran, because there is a very dangerous combination when we look at Iran. First of all, it brings together authoritarian views with religious secularism, as we have heard here today. And let me stop on that. The misuse of Islam. And yes, I know that there is misuse of Christianity also in the world, but now we speak about misuse of Islam. In the name of Islam, to tell that we should learn to hate each other, that it's right to kill people, that it's right to divide people in groups that are clean and those that are unclean, is just to create a world where we can never live together. And it's totally impossible to understand for me how anyone can make reference to a God who wants us to hate each other, who wants us to kill. And to me, that's not the voice of God. That's the voice of tyrannous men who think they can rule in the name of God and use that power to do harm to people. That is extremely dangerous all over the world, but especially what we see in Iran. This is misused very much. And it spreads around the world and makes us nervous also in other parts of the world, because many young people are told that in the name of Islam, you have the right to use violence to achieve political goals. And on top of that, exactly as mentioned here, we have the nuclear ambitions. The nuclear ambitions, and we understand why. The people they want food, they want freedom, they don't want nuclear weapons. No one has ever asked for nuclear weapons. It's the idea of a few, because they want... And we know why. Because they cannot rely on support of the people in winning free elections. They need the nuclear heads to stay behind and be secure, because otherwise they could come under pressure, and therefore lose the mighty influence that they love and they think is so important. That's why they want the bomb, nothing else. They understand that if you have a nuclear head, you might be able to push the international community away from yourself by being too dangerous. And that's why it's so important that we follow the case in Iran, where they now enrich uranium to a point which goes much further than has been internationally agreed, and they have done so in breach with the international agreements that I know that you think is not the best way to solve this situation. So, I hear when you gather also your frustration. You want the world to see what is going on in Iran, and you want the world to react. So why doesn't it? Why don't the world react to all of this? Well, first of all, we have now seen a decade of a rise of authoritarian nationalism all over the world, even in the more open democratic countries in Europe and other parts of the world. The trend has been to look inside to your countries, speak to yourself, only focus on what happens in your country, and don't interest yourselves in the problems that other people have in other parts of the world. That's a very dangerous notion. That's when you hear America first. That's when you hear, sorry to say, Brexit. That's when you hear Italy first, or whatever it's called. Look inside your own country, don't care what happens in the world. Well, we should be thankful to all that feel that they also can put up energy and interest for other people than just the one you locally live together with, because that would be a kind of world where no one sees anything, and that's the best atmosphere for dictatorship and repression. That's why these meetings are so important. That's why it's also important to find a way to react in the world. And at the moment, we have seen a weaker United States. Yes, Donald Trump, America first, but it continues. And we see a division in Europe, which of course is used by these authoritarian countries to push ahead. That's why you see what is now happening in Russia. That's why you see the increase from China. That's why you see what's happening in Turkey. That's what you see is happening in Iran. So it's extremely important to get a kind of world order that works, that is clear. We talk about the international community, but based on what kind of world leadership? And I want to remind you, although I've been active in Europe, that I understand that that must also rely on the United States. I wrote a book where I went down to really dig into what kind of world order have we seen in the world. And Henry Kissinger, a very famous foreign minister in the United States, he actually wrote a book where he said, well, the world order has to be one of four that are trying to actually rule the world. And what does he mean with that? It's a capacity from someone who wants to rule the world and have the strength to do it. And of course, that's mainly America. That's why we call it Pax Americana. But it's coming to an end. He mentioned that Europe used to be the one, probably now too weak. But he also mentioned that China has this ambition. And listen to Xi Jinping. This is exactly what he says. China will be the mightiest country in the world, and their way of living is superior to the democracies in the West. But the fourth was Islam. The idea that the world can only be safe and good if everyone is practicing Muslims, because otherwise they are unclean. And of course, that way of thinking shows what we have at risk. That's why I'm telling you, if you don't want that kind of rule, the Chinese rule, and we don't believe that Europe on its own can rule the world, it has to be a combination of the United States and the free, open democracies of the world, mainly in Europe, together. The problem is, if you look into the United States, they've always been divided into three. Either it has been isolationism, which actually goes 200 years back to the Monroe Doctrine, and of course that is what Donald Trump brought up with America First. Or it has been collective security, which was taken about from Woodrow Wilson and Franklin D. Roosevelt. That's why we refer to United Nations. The problem with United Nations is that the idea was that the biggest countries and the mightiest should work together to secure freedom and to push back authoritarian rule. The problem is that inside that Security Council we have Russia and China, and to be clear, they do not want democracies in the way I have described it and freedom as you want to see in Iran, and that's the world problem. They're not strong enough together, and that's why I remind you that the third level in the United States had always been to talk about the iron fist. That goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, who actually said, well, yes, collective security, but also a United States strong enough to push back authoritarian rule, not just by resolution, but being so strong that we, through economics and diplomacy, can push back. I'm not talking militarily, I'm talking about diplomacy and economically push back on authoritarian rule, because it will not be enough with what you see on collective security in the United Nations. I think we should be clear on this. If you want the international community to react more sharply to what is happening in Iran, you need that combination. You need to wake up the United States to come out of the America First thinking, and you need Europe to join together to stand up for the values of democracy, and in doing so, using all powers except for the military to push back authoritarian rule wherever you will see it. And one of the toughest cases and most important will be the Mullahs of Iran, because they are a threat to their people, to their country, they are a threat to the region, and they are a threat to the world by destabilizing, by using Islam, by wanting to have nuclear weapons. That is what we need to do. Thank you very much.